Welcome to Suncoast In-Depth Podcast. My name is Brett Watson, and today I have my good buddy Kevin O'Hara with me. We're going to talk about Reconstruction. So just real quick, I started doing these because I wanted to give people a place to hear stories about people deconstructing their faith, but not necessarily throwing the baby Jesus out with bathwater as they reconstruct something. And although I'm not sure that you've done that,
Right.
because you and I have, we went through a lot of deconstruction together.
Yeah.
When Kevin and I pastored a church together for years, and then ended up coming to Suncoast together. But before we get into that shared experience, just kind of go back and fill people in on how you converted to Christianity. You know what your background was. I know your dad was a pastor.
Right.
Your grandfather was a pastor. So
Yeah, my dad, he was a pastor, and he was a pastor of a Pentecostal church. And, so I kind of grew up in the church. My dad, though, also was, especially as I got into my teen years, he was an alcoholic, and it got worse and worse. So I can remember even as a child, realizing, like at the age of 7, that it was not okay for my dad to be an alcoholic and a pastor, and that I needed to help my family hide the fact that he was an alcoholic. My earliest memories, I got to make sure.
How did you hide it?
Well, just
can you remember an incident?
It was just a thing. You didn't talk about it. I of course couldn't really do anything myself, but if he had been laying drunk, in the bedroom on a Wednesday afternoon after school and my mom wasn't there, and a parishioner would have come to the door, I would have told them he wasn't home.
Yeah. Okay.
So that kind of thing, But, so then growing up, I saw also the typical hypocrisy, in the church. And interestingly enough, my dad was always a thinker, and he encouraged me to be a thinker. And so, I just, by the time I was 18, 19, I went to college for music. I wanted to be a rock star. And, but, of course, you take on their classes, and in college, I took anthropology. I took classes that sort of opened my eyes to some of the problems with religion in general. And so there kind of came a point where I kind of decided I was an atheist.
Like, how old were you when?
I remember being about 19 when I decided that. And
see, that's where our stories are different, because I converted around 18, 19.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I kind of decided I was an atheist.
Not raised in a.
You weren't raised in a church, home, right? That's an interesting sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and then one day, about that age, maybe I was 18 when I decided that, but I remember my grandfather passed away when I was 19, and I had gone up to Ohio for his funeral. And I can't remember the circumstances, but I was flying back home by myself. I can't remember why exactly, but I was by myself. And so I was in the airport, and, they had bookstores and everything. And I was always like a Star Trek fan. I was always a sci-fi fan. I enjoyed that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And
still are.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I came across this book in the bookstore. I just, had the cover, had this skinny-looking dude in a wheelchair, and it was called A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. And I thought, oh, this is cool. It's about the universe and the cosmos and everything. And so I bought it, and I started reading it, and to my surprise, he would often refer to God. Now, he was doing it in a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek manner. I mean, or at least allegorically. But the reason he would do that is because one of the main themes of the book is how much the universe looked like it was designed.
Yeah.
And that's still true today. All theoretical physicists and cosmologists will freely admit that. It very much has that appearance. And so I was blown away by that, And so then that got me on the path of thinking, okay, maybe there is something to God, maybe there's something to religion. And I remember making the decision, I remember making the decision literally after reading that book, because I was a music major. I decided that I was going to change my major to physics, okay? And I was going to go on a search for the truth. And so that book really actually changed my life. I had no idea, like when I changed my major to physics, I didn't even realize that you needed a lot of math to be a physicist. That's, and so, that my first, so that began a journey of like tons and tons of math, but I discovered I had a real talent for it. I started like in basic algebra at a community college because I literally had nothing. I couldn't even pass, when they did the standardized sort of test, I couldn't pass anything. I didn't know anything.
Clep out of anything.
No, I couldn't even. From the test, I had to start at the lowest. I had to take 2 classes that weren't even for credit, just so I could take college algebra.
I had to take 1, yeah.
Yeah. So, but what I discovered is it totally felt natural to me, and so I went basic algebra, intermediate algebra, which I didn't get credit for, college algebra, pre-calc. Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3, differential equations, and I did every one in a semester. So it literally took me 2.5 years to get from knowing nothing through differential equations, Yeah. And so that time I learned a lot, but long story short, so I was on the path of being a physics major and all that. And I actually remember telling a professor that I was on a search for the truth. I just wanted to know the truth, whatever that was, and I remember him saying to me, he's like, yeah, okay, so what if you just come full circle? What if, we discover that what you believe now, because I kind of shared with him that I was like an atheist. He said, what if you go on the search for truth and after you just come back to right to where you are? And I'm like, well, then that's what it will be. I think maybe I had a hope then that there was something more, and he was like trying to prepare me for maybe there's not.
Maybe he would be surprised to hear a kid say that, or not sense any bias and really just be interested in what is true.
Yeah, right. But we had some interesting conversations. He was great. He was my pre-calc professor. But and so then, I was on this search for the truth, but I had become very much a man of the world, I was in a rock band, and the old adage, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That was a metaphor for my life. That was kind of my life, Yeah. I was never, fortunately, I was always kind of also into fitness and working out and everything. So I never really did drugs like a lot of my friends did. I did it very socially and, very, very much in moderation, So, but, I still did it. I was very, very promiscuous. I was always going into, I lived in strip bars. By the time I was like 21, being in a rock band, long hair, I was sort of dating strippers exclusively, And so, but I was still on this search, for the truth. And I had become a lot more, I had read some C.S. Lewis. He's a really good apologist. I had talked to a few scientists, physicists who were like very open to the idea of God. I read a book called Bios, Cosmos, Theos, where it was like, scientists, biologists, physicists, all these guys believed in evolution and, all that. And, but taking seriously the idea of something, a God or something divine. And so I'm on this journey and I meet this stripper in a strip bar and we start dating and it gets serious. And long story short, one night we're at her house in bed together and I hear her crying. And she basically was crying because she well, she thought I was going to dump her. But the reason she thought that is because she was so shallow and I was so deep. And, I don't know what it was.
You were going to dump her, weren't you?
I was actually, yes. Which was weird because she said it and it was almost like something clued her into it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I just had this feeling that, she needed, like if there were things in the Bible that could help her, and I was pretty darn familiar with the Bible, because I was raised in a church and I asked her if she had one and sure enough she did. And so we opened to Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, and she starts reading it, and we're up this like in the middle of the night, and she's reading the place where Jesus says, build not your treasures on this earth, where moth and rust corrupt, but build your treasures in heaven. And that was her whole thing. It's just like if I just had enough money, and that's why she was stripping. And I mean, she was reading those passages and just bawling her eyes out, And as she was doing that, it was just so powerful. I was watching her do this, and the way I've described it before is it was as though the Holy Spirit was just jumping off the pages of Scripture and piercing her heart, but then piercing mine too. It was, I was watching something so powerful that it was difficult for me to deny the reality. To me, it very much felt like there was another presence in the room at that moment, which also made me feel very uncomfortable too. Because I always had this sense that if I got saved, that's the word, that I would be going into ministry. I just had that feeling because...
And you wanted to avoid that.
Yeah, I really wanted to avoid that at all costs. That's, and so I just had this this fear of this God I wasn't sure I believed in, but I had a fear of what he would demand of me and so forth, And so she, at one point, she calms down, she says, I know that it's not God's will for me to be a stripper. And so I'm going to quit doing it. And so she asked me if I would pray with her. And so she prayed, and she just... I didn't lead her through the sinner's prayer or anything like that. She just said, God, please just, I'm giving you my life, in essence, and just when she prayed that, there was just something in me that said, yeah, okay, me too, I just, and I, she was renting a room from this guy. She didn't have a driver's license. She didn't have a car. She took taxis to the strip bar, but she said at the end of the prayer, she said, I'm not, that's it. I'm not going back ever. And by God, she didn't, and at the time I thought, yeah, you're going to have to go back because you're going to have to make money. And, but she didn't. She found a way somehow to never go back. And then I started falling in love with her. And you know the story. This was, Tommy Lynn. She became my wife. We got married. But that, when that happened, then I had this emotional vested interest in her getting better, in her becoming this person, because now I loved her. And so now I didn't want her to be a stripper. I wanted her to have a good life, and so, and it just seemed like this whole Jesus thing was what was working.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it changed me. It's just changed the course of my life there too. So now I'm on this search for the truth, but I'm also now I want Jesus to be real, and I want God to be real. And so we start going to this church, Northland Community Church, together. And there I heard Joel Hunter, best preacher I'd ever heard in my life. And he really, he was something of an apologist too. And he made everything make sense, I thought all churches, like people spoke in tongues, and I had no idea that
just to give people reference, this is a big church, right?
Oh yeah, it was like
Is he retired yet?
He's been retired for like 15 years now. But
what?
Yeah, it's been a while. Maybe not that long. Maybe it's been 10 years, but he's been gone for a while now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, he served on.
Joel was spiritual advisor? No, he was Barack Obama's spiritual advisor.
Barack Obama,
yeah, Barack Obama. And so in the time I was there, the church went from like 2,000 to like, my gosh, 20,000. It just grew. And I was in a meeting with him a men's meeting that only like dozen or so people came. He was like my idol, and I had many conversations with him, and he was very, very kind and took me under his wing, and and mentored me and that kind of thing. I really learned to preach from him. Really, I just mimicked him at the beginning. That's all I did, and so I went into ministry, and I just became convinced. Okay, Jesus is real, and everything. And I was never one of those guys like I never believed like in a young Earth creation. None of that. I was never that. So I was always, I guess someone could say, I always had certain liberal tendencies. I was very much a rationalist. My dad was, and I got it from him, and he taught me that, And I was, a believer in science and everything. So there was never really a time, I don't even remember a time when I didn't believe in evolution, really.
Yeah.
And so there came this time where I said, okay, I want to go into ministry, but one of the things I want to do, because at this point I had gotten a long way into my physics and math degree and everything, and I'd learned a lot. And I said, what I want to do is I want to try and bring Christianity into the 20th and 21st century. That's what I want to do. And I had become something of an apologist, and I wanted to help the church bring their faith on a more solid, rational grounds. I wanted to show them, look, you don't have to throw science out. And that was popular in the mid-90s.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was like, science and the church were just at war. I mean, it was nobody, if you were a Christian, you didn't believe in evolution, at all, and, very likely you believed in a young Earth creation and that kind of thing, which I saw as being insane, and so
even I didn't have a science education.
Right.
And I was a fundamentalist. I was an evangelical, but I always had a problem with young Earth creationism, because I was interested in science, and so I would read things, and
right.
I just thought, that's not true.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. So what happened is I actually then I enrolled in Stetson University. I'd graduated from the community college, and so I wanted to go to Stetson because I wanted a minor in religion and keep my physics major and everything. And so that's what I did. So there is where I was introduced to the historical scientific method of, biblical criticism, redactive criticism, form criticism, all the scholarly ways of studying the Bible. And so now I'm being introduced to sort of the scientific approach to
religion.
To religion, that's right. And so now I was on a path where I'm getting an education in math and science, which was very much informing me in terms of, look, a lot of that, especially because of my emphasis and what I was interested in, a lot of my education centered on understanding what is the difference between good evidence and bad evidence. Okay, and so now that was bleeding over into the science of religion and scholarly endeavors there. And so then from that point, I started a church, and we went for a while. I finally broke away from that church and then started another church, which is the one that you eventually became a part of. I started that. But all through those years then, so I started that church in 2000, and we went to 2017. I met you 7 years into starting that church, which was 2007. But all through those years, I was on a path of constantly sort of, as I was learning, deconstructing and then reconstructing and then deconstructing. So I feel like I've been deconstructing for, 25 years.
Yeah.
But always reconstructing then.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's what I've been doing. And much of that, you were with me, from 2007 really till even present, because we still, it's not like, so for the last, 16 years now, you and I have been doing a lot of that together. And so that was the story of
so talk about how my wisdom helped you.
Well, it was, I mean, you think about the hours and hours that we sat.
Yeah, because pastors don't have a real job.
Yeah, right. So, but the hours and hours that we sat discussing things and doing research, like I remember when we started like looking at the idea of the different atonement theories, and how blown away we were at just how prominent many of them were in the first century, and how like penal substitution didn't even the forerunner of it, wasn't around until Anselm, like in the 11th century. 11 centuries went by and no one really thought of it that way and so, all those things. And of course, all of that was like, okay, I remember us thinking, okay, well, that does allow us then, because there were certainly things that just didn't make sense with like the penal substitution of atonement. And so it allowed us to give a broader view, and that kind of thing. And so I guess the real question is as we were going through there, I mean, it does feel like, okay, so here you are in your belief system, and then you learn a little bit more and you think, oh, okay, well, no, that has to be thrown out. But now this can be brought in and go a little further. Okay, now that has to be thrown out. But now something else can be brought in. So that's kind of what I would – and I think maybe like what a lot of people do is they're so ingrained – and maybe you and I were insulated from this because of the approach that we took early on, because the interesting thing is we both, as we got serious about it, we were both at a place where we were kind of atheist. So we didn't really, we didn't have anything that we were holding on to. We had no sacred cows. We had no doctrines that hills that we had to die on.
Not where we deconstructed. You're saying where we started,
right?
Just spiritually,
exactly. So because we started there, later on, it wasn't like a big deal to say, okay, well, right. So penal substitution, it doesn't make sense. Let's do something. I think for you and I, that was much easier than for a lot of people. You know, so if you're just kind of raised in the church your whole life and you've had nothing but good experiences. You didn't have a dad who was a alcoholic pastor, and you didn't,
or whatever,
right? Yeah. So if you've had all just good experiences, and all the people who have loved you most and given you the most wisdom and cared for you were all Christians, and maybe you go to a church like Northland. Your family went to a place like Northland your whole life, and so you're just, this is your worldview, man, and everything you have ever heard, I mean, like penal substitution, just using that as an example, the idea that Jesus died on the cross for your sins. He took your punishment upon himself. This is the love of God, and because he's done this, you can now just have the grace of God because he took your punishment. There's something beautiful about that on the surface.
On the
surface, right. When you dig deeper, it starts to really seem horrid, but
it makes God basically a monster.
Yeah, exactly. But
an abusive father.
But there's a great example of how on the surface, something can appear like lovely and true. And by the way, I mean, that happens in science all the time. So that's one of the problems we have in our country, how uneducated people are about science. And there's just a lot of things it's easy to believe that seems right, and it's not right. And that's one of the interesting things about our world. I mean, of course, the ancients looked at the sun, the moon, and the stars going around the sky every day and naturally thought that, well, it's all just circling us. We're in the middle of it all. That would be a natural thing to think.
Sure.
And it's interesting that the world seems to be set up in a way where it would lead you, even if you're trying to think, even if you are thinking rationally, it would lead you to some false conclusions. And so I'm very empathetic with those people because, so they've been raised in the church and Jesus died for my sins and everything. And it seems very real. And so then what happens, and then they're taught, the Bible is the word of God. It's inerrant. It's absolutely inerrant. They read it as a layperson. And so then it's somewhere along the way, and I would be interested to hear why you think there's so many Christians deconstructing now in the year 2023 or in the last, why it's, I mean, that wasn't happening from the 80s and the 90s, really.
Well, let me touch on that for a second,
Okay.
because I was thinking about this morning. What's been interesting in doing these talks, kind of interviewing people about their own deconstruction experience, is that the majority of them did not deconstruct for intellectual reasons.
Right.
It was more like they deconstructed because of either some traumatic event in their family or relational problems. They went through a divorce. The church frowned on them about that,
Right.
and
Right.
whatever. There's a million different examples, but it's usually some kind of social reason
Right.
that they end up leaving community. But then the intellectual side becomes an excuse to stay away.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right.
You and I deconstructed kind of the opposite.
Right.
That's right. We didn't have to worry about that relational stuff. And we were just interested in the more intellectual side of things. And so it was different for us. And I think that's important for me to remember.
Yeah.
Because as I try to minister to people, it just gives me better perspective, I guess, on where they're coming from.
Right.
Anyway. So.
Yeah. And, what I find interesting about that is, it
Oh, but I do think that the growing demographic that is the deconstructed, I think a lot of that, the catalyst for it is the information age, though.
Yes. Yeah.
And
I would agree with that.
And
like I think young people,
the massive political division and the kind of almost personality cult silliness that
Yeah.
a lot of the church seems to get caught up in.
Yeah.
At least, evangelical Christianity.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that like young people going into college, say your typical sophomore, let's say, they just don't believe any of this.
No.
And they never have. So,
right.
So for whatever reason, so yes, I agree. It does seem like it's more for social reasons. But what I find interesting about that is I think to myself, well, listen, how seriously did you take your faith then? Because
that's a good question.
Look, your faith clearly says that, Jesus said, look, if you follow me, there's going to be people who are going to do you wrong. You're going to have to pick up your cross. Yeah. There's going to be people who are, not going to be who you thought they were.
I didn't tell you to
wear.
You
need to love them anyway.
Yeah. I didn't tell you to wear my cross. I told you to bear yours.
Yours, that's right. And so, I've noticed that a lot, like with lifelong Christians.
And look, we've been in ministry long enough to know that it's not just the reason that people leave community is for social reasons, but they weren't educated in their faith when they left.
No.
And so that's why a lot of them don't bother to do any of that when they go.
Right. And I think that, so like you said, so the social things happen. And, and I think a lot of them, no matter what they gave lip service to, like they're lifelong Christians, and life is good and the family and, the 2.5 kids and we go to church every day and life is good. And, a lot of the people in the world they're struggling is because they need Jesus. That's the reason they're struggling, and they make these unwise decisions and then they go through a divorce.
Yes.
Or their kid gets hooked on drugs and just can't give it up no matter how much they pray for them. And all of a sudden, I think that in the back of their mind, there was this thing that said, yeah, life is going to be good because God's on my side. Mm-hmm. He's looking out for me and he's taking care of things. And when we say, we've got to have faith through hard times, we just mean things like, Dan's trying for that promotion at work, and
I'm
we're just going
struggling
to
now,
have
but one day I'm going to be rich.
yeah, or just we want to have Dan wants this promotion at his job, and we're going to have faith that it's going to happen because then our kid can go to a better college, and so we're praying for it, and we're just going to believe, it's things like that. They don't really think. Oh, my kid's going to get hooked on OxyContin or something at school, and
but then life throws you those curveballs,
and so then you question it because it's like, okay, the Bible says the prayer and faith will heal him, and the whole church has been praying for my son, and or our marriage, we're getting divorced. My husband's having an affair, and he's not supposed to do that. He knows that's wrong, and I'm praying about it, and the church is praying about it, but he refuses to stop, or he says he's going to stop, and then he goes back. And I know it can't be God's will. The Bible says God hates divorce. So why isn't God doing something? And so those are more legitimate questions, I think. And so then what happens is they're just like, well, God's not doing anything. And so they start kind of giving up on it, or, sometimes I think more educated Christians, they have just a sense that something's not right here.
Yeah.
This just isn't fitting, especially in the information age when I can, if I do anything on the internet that has to do with religion, I'm going to see Richard Dawkins. I'm going to see Hitchens. I'm going to see Sam Harris, and I'm going to hear some of their arguments, and even in little doses, they're pretty powerful arguments, And so I think that those things happen, and then they just sort of, they at some point, or here's a good example, at some point somebody just shows them incontrovertible evidence that the Bible has contradictions in it, and not just a few, but a lot.
Over 100.
Right.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah.
And that just destroys them because somehow they've been taught that if the Bible, the only way it can be the Word of God is if it's completely inerrant. And so they're taught that it's inerrant. So then when they discover it is not inerrant, then that means it can't be the Word of God.
Which isn't necessarily true.
Yeah, so that, right, and therein lies the rub. And so what happens is they just get a blow to their faith like that.
Yes.
And maybe just give up, or like you said, if something bad happens too, and especially if somebody does them wrong, so, hey, my wife decided to leave me. I prayed about it, had the church pray about it,
God did nothing.
God did nothing. And now that we're divorced, my church looks at me like I'm a bad guy because, well, God hates divorce when I couldn't do anything about it. And, now I've discovered, as I'm looking through the Bible and doing research to try and understand what's happening in my life for the first time, I'm really reading the Bible trying to find truth. I find that there's these discrepancies and contradictions in it, and my church is treating me like crap.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden you're like, yeah, you know what? I don't believe any of this crap anymore. And you're angry about it because you feel like you've been duped your whole life.
Yeah. And you probably even feel some loss.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah.
There's grieving that takes place and
right.
And anger.
Right.
I never really had that.
Yeah, that's because I think the path that we took, it wasn't really I regret some of the decisions that I made because of the beliefs that I had that I now see as erroneous. I wish I could have discovered some of it a little quicker.
Yeah. I had an experience with that just recently. We went up to North Carolina with our friends that were kids in my first youth group.
Right.
In my evangelical days. And they've deconstructed to where they're not going to church.
Yeah.
And these were, these kids, now they're 40 years old.
Right.
They were in ministry up until about maybe actually only 7 years ago.
Yeah. Well, like at our church, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So,
led worship for us.
Right. Yeah.
and to see them deconstructed and so hurt by their experiences in the church back then, especially after my divorce and I lost my ministry and and to hear the stories of what they went through in my absence and to feel like I played a part in that. I just have some regrets there.
Right.
And I apologize to them.
No, and of course that was, I mean, they stayed in ministry long after that.
They did.
I'm curious, I'm curious what their belief system is now, because I think the thing that we got to talk about is what constitutes not throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
That is a good question.
And so, I mean, it seems to me like if we want, you want to help people deconstruct in a healthy way, because for sure, there are just really some erroneous ideas and beliefs that much of the evangelical church is digging their heels in on, which, should be rejected.
Yes.
And in that sense, there should be sort of a revolution there of people deconstructing and getting rid of that. But so as to not be left with this sort of nihilism.
Yes.
That to me is a key question. What does it mean? Can you rebuild a faith that can embrace, all of modern science, including evolution and things like that? Can it embrace all the findings here of recent social studies and, that things that psychology has uncovered, things that neurobiology has uncovered? There's a lot there, and if you're, and it seems to me that, you have no choice but to embrace, empirical science in the sense that once there's enough empirical evidence for something grounded in solid rationality that leads to conclusions that are really difficult. I mean, it might be at a place where, okay, maybe we'll discover something someday that says this isn't right.
But if something reaches the level of theory,
it
has a lot of evidence backing it up.
Yeah. And,
and a lot of people don't understand that.
Right. And the social science today, they've come a long way. I mean, now they're really capable of revealing a lot about human nature and the way we think, especially about our irrationalities. But it's also an advantage because you can see, if you study that stuff, you can see why, you believe some things that probably weren't true with regard to faith, But it seems to me that rebuilding something that can embrace all of that stuff, but then still be powerful and give you hope and give you a sense of meaning and purpose in life.
I think there's two things, right, that are important, at least two that I can think of right now. Training yourself to at least want to discover what is true.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Understanding yourself as a human being and therefore given to a lot of irrational thinking.
Right.
And then striving to become more rational in your thinking.
Right.
As you observe reality, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is to engage in spiritual practice. We can't test much about theology, right? But you've said this, the one thing that we can test is see if it actually changes my life.
Yeah.
And so spiritual practice, meaning prayer, meditation, that kind of thing, service for others, and that study, those things you can see if it actually changes you.
Right.
That's one way we can experiment with Christianity.
Right.
If I really study it and I seek to understand it as best I can and actually live it out, and I actually strive in prayer and meditation to engage with this God that I believe to be there, then maybe I will have experiences, and one of those ongoing experiences will be the transformation
Yeah. Well, I think a great practical example of that is like, when we had the ministry to the recovery group, Celebrate Recovery, what I have noticed is, the 12-step programs for NA and AA, and especially those first 3 steps, I admitted to myself that I was powerless over this addiction, came to believe in a power greater than myself that could restore me to sanity, turned my will and my life, the 3rd step, turned my will and my life over to this God as I understood him, and those 12 steps, what's interesting about that is it seems to work when people really turn themselves over. And what is also interesting is I've never seen anybody who said, you know what, I'm an addict, but I'm just not doing it that way. I'm not, I don't believe in this God crap, and I'm not turning anything. I don't believe in a higher power.
Yeah.
I've never seen it work for them. They're never able to do it.
And I've had a lot of exposure to the recovery world.
That's right.
Too.
Yeah. And so I realized this is my science training. I realized that I probably would have had a biased group, though. I would have had a lot more of those people, because I was a minister in Celebrate Recovery, who had accepted it. So my sample size for that was much bigger than my sample size for the people who were just refusing, although I do have a small sample size of that. None of it worked. So I looked into it. I looked into it. What's the literature say?
Oh, okay.
And it seems like, there are people who try and make arguments that, well, okay, you could, but you can do it without 12-step. But it seems like what works, what everybody admits, are these 12-step programs. And so, so there's what works. And then, the other thought I've had is, you and I like the amount of study and research and education that you have to get to where we are is untenable for most people.
Yeah.
They don't have the time, and let's say there was a revolution in religious thinking. It would be great if it started in Christianity, right? But, there's a revolution in Christianity that says, hey, we need a new sort of Christianity for the 21st century. And so, we need to deconstruct out all of these erroneous ideas that the church has had, and we need to be on a more solid, rational foundation. And so we've got the hard thinkers that really do all the scholarly thinking and research to do that. But then you've got all the people who are saying, look, I just need answers to sort of my immediate questions, and I need to know kind of like what to believe and what makes sense, and what's defendable in an everyday kind of conversation with the people I'm going to run into, without me having to do the equivalent of becoming a PhD in philosophy, science, and theology, Yeah. So it's like, and it's like, and I was thinking about this actually on the way over, what are the things that we could offer to people where we would say, okay, here's going to be some differences in what you were raised in and what you should believe. And here's maybe a brief explanation why, but then, what does this allow you to do? Like, so let's say, for example, okay, so we want to reconstruct a faith. How should you view the Bible then? Mm-hmm. What can we give to people to say, okay, how should I now view the Bible? If it's not inerrant, and what is defendable at the highest rational level, even though I don't understand all of that, but it would be defendable, and and so I'm not any longer in the danger zone of, well, someone's going to come along and show me that's an idiotic belief.
Yes.
Yeah,
and I think that's doable. I know you do too.
Yeah.
But you've, at some point, because the level of study, research, and so on is untenable for most people, and even interest level, right?
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
One of the things they've got to trust the people that did put in the time.
Yeah, right.
On some level, and then whatever you don't agree with them on. You can. There's information out there.
Right.
You can research it, right?
Yeah, and that's, I think one of the tenets actually should be, though, that, well, in this new Christianity for the 21st century, or a religion for the 21st century. Actually, I want to write a book entitled "Religion for the 21st Century." But in this new religion, it is something. One of the tenets of the faith would be: look, yes, we understand not everybody's a scholar, but what we don't want to do is have our laity do what has been done in the past, which is know almost nothing.
Yes.
You know,
That's right.
so yes, you know, one of the tenets of our faith is that you do go as far as you can in understanding why we believe the things that we believe, you know, and people are going to be at different levels and different ability for doing that.
There needs
but
to
we
be
expect you to do, you know, to push yourself as hard as you
reasonable
can.
amount of effort needs to be made.
Right.
If you're going to call yourself a follower of Christ, as an
Right.
example, or if you're a Buddhist, you should do a
Yeah,
reasonable
right.
amount of study so that you can understand the tenets of what you're saying you are.
Right.
And this has been definitely a huge problem. And
Oh, no, yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, like you, I mean, what I think is true is that, you know, the 21st century came along and all of a sudden we had the internet. And before that, you know, Christianity had such a foothold in America and even in earlier centuries, the entire Western civilization, that, you know, to question it was, I mean, social death at the very least.
Yes.
You know, but then as time moved on,
it's fascinating how much that's changed just in our
Oh,
lifetime.
right. That's right. In fact,
Now to
be a Christian could be
embrace the
social
Bible.
death, right? But that's right. And so in the 80s and in the 90s, I mean, it was perfectly okay, you know, that, hey, you know, if you're gay, you're a sinner.
Period.
And you're going to hell, period, you know,
Yeah.
and you're making a choice here. It's the wrong choice, and you need to find Jesus. And, you know, and so, but what happened was, and you know, and to stand up and say, well, I don't believe that, or I'm an atheist, or I mean, it was like, yeah, I mean, you were a social pariah, you know, but then what happened was when the internet came along, all of a sudden now there was a forum for lots of people to speak up, but to do so anonymously.
Yes, they could be honest.
Right.
Yeah.
And they could be honest, and they would, and then they would
yeah.
put forth these arguments for why they didn't believe these things, and they were pretty darn good arguments.
Yes.
And they got better and better. And so then all of a sudden people start looking and saying, oh, hey, wait a minute. Like thinking people who had doubts about certain things all along began to realize that they weren't alone at all. There are lots of people having those same doubts, and so before long, it became a thing where everyone realized that, and so you weren't all of a sudden now you weren't afraid.
Yes.
You know, and to do so even not being anonymous.
And you even put a fish with feet on the back of your
yeah,
car.
that's right. Yeah,
It says Darwin.
yeah, it says evolve, like, you know, hey dummy, evolve. You know,
Yeah.
and so that transformation began to take place, and then you had the Richard Dawkins, and you had the Christopher Hitchens and the Sam Harrises come along, really good thinkers, laying out, you know, really powerful arguments for why they did not believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
They were convinced atheists. I mean, Dawkins and Hitchens more than Harris. Harris is a little more
Spiritual.
Spiritual, yeah. I mean, he would even probably be okay with saying, hey, maybe there is some kind of grand consciousness. You know,
The other two horsemen, you know, well, Dawkins. So it was the four horsemen: Dawkins, Harris,
Christopher
Hitchens, and who's the fourth one?
I can never remember. Those are the guys. Yeah.
I can't remember either. Anyway, Dawkins and Hitchens, I called them the angry atheists.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Right.
Sam Harris, he was never really angry about it.
Didn't seem that way.
No.
Right. Yeah. Guys like Dawkins were angry because, you know, it's like they have got mountains and mountains and mountains of evidence, you know, for like evolution.
Yeah.
And you've got these Christians calling for, you know, teaching
creationism and
side by side, and things like that,
and that's where I can empathize with that.
Right.
Anger. I mean, really.
Right.
I mean, come on, guys. Somebody told me recently that I asked them where their child was going to school, and they named a Christian school for high school.
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, and she could tell that I was kind of like, oh,
Yeah.
and
The kind of school where in math class they like it if you talk about Jesus more than math.
maybe, I don't really know,
Yeah.
but then said, I think I'm going to have my child come in and talk with you, because I know that they're going to feed them. This is a quote. I know they're going to feed them a lot of bullshit.
Yeah.
I said, that's fine. That's great. I mean, but,
Right.
probably with math and English and science, I'm sure they're using curriculum that's, decent. And she said, it's all from Bob Jones.
Oh, yeah.
So, I don't
Yeah.
yeah. But, so that's still going on today.
Yeah.
It is.
Right.
But less
I
and
actually,
less.
taught from a Bob Jones book. It actually was not bad. It's just that they would try and fit. They would just, like when they talked about isosceles triangles, the isosceles triangle is much like the Trinity. It's
Yeah,
like
right.
But
But they still taught it.
they still taught
Yeah.
right. Nobody is trying to claim that the theorems of geometry are somehow not true, or
Yeah. But
Now when
evolution
that's right. If you that's in math. If you go into the sciences, then yes, you are being fed. I mean, it's disgraceful, the things that you're taught. It is literally disgraceful. So
yeah,
yeah,
that's a shame.
it is. But that's I mean, and we haven't really talked about this, but just I would like to, maybe at some point we could, and we've talked about like the C.S. Lewis Christianity, where it would be really cool to say, hey, look, let's give you a version of Christianity, and let's go through all the old doctrines and say, here's how it should look. If you want to hold onto your faith and have one that makes sense and that you can defend, let's talk about the Bible. What should you believe about the Bible? Let's talk about Jesus. What should you believe about Jesus? Let's talk about, miracles. Let's talk about prayer. Let's talk about, all of these things in baptism, communion. What was their historic, underpinnings, and how should you view these things today? And therefore, how do you live your life?
Yeah.
And then most of all, and I think this is right, because the most important part is, okay, so now what is your moral compass? And what is considered to be right and wrong? And because I don't believe that you come away from that, like where I am in my theology, let's say. Sam Harris and I would disagree. He's more an atheist and I'm still a theist, okay? But to be perfectly honest, him and I would mostly see eye to eye on how to run the world.
Yes.
Like the role of government, a system of values that works, the role of morality, the kinds of behaviors that people should exhibit, and refrain from. Mostly we'd see there. I think he's more afraid of AI than I am. We might disagree on like points like that, but on moral issues and on how society should run, I mean, we would just 99.9% would agree. And so that's the cool thing. I think that we could present a faith of just call it a version of Christianity, if you will, that you could then
that gets along with others and benefits the world,
right, and does not see the need to convert everybody to what you believe,
right,
and can
not
work
exclusionary,
with right, and can work with people who is at least in the same wheelhouse in terms of, hey, how can we make the world a better place that basically agrees with your values. So even if they don't believe in the same underpinnings that gives rise to your values, the same beliefs that give rise, you still sell the same, they share the same values, right? And so you can work with those people to bring about a better world, and I would argue a world that if in any sense you take the Bible seriously, would mean making the world a better place, bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth. That seems to be a common theme in Old Testament and New Testament that you can see repeated throughout centuries, of the idea that the kingdom of heaven will one day be here on earth. And what does that mean, and how should we understand that?
Yeah.
And I think that what else, what gives your life more meaning than bringing about a world in which there is, in the way the Bible describes it, a world with no war, a world with no famine and poverty, a world with no disease and sickness. I mean, I think that we're on the cusp of if Christians could start getting it right and go ahead and get rid of all the nonsense and deconstruct in a healthy way, but then reconstruct, their
Something
faith and
sustainable.
health, they could just be such a huge force in the world to bring about that world, and you and I have been saying forever, that's the kind of thing we'd like to be a part of,
Yes. Yeah.
But part of it does mean being rational. If you're going to be, it's interesting because I see these things in Christianity that really would just really be a great kind of a value to have. I mean, so like within Christianity, there's this concept that, hey, look, you're first now a citizen of the kingdom of heaven more than anything else. That's what you are. So you might be proud to be an American or from some other country, but you're a Christian first, not an American first. You're a Christian first, okay? And so what you should want is to bring about, what does it mean to bring about the kingdom of heaven on this earth? And if that ultimately means, hey, in the long run, yes, people starving, and there's nothing written that says that people in other countries are somehow not as important as people in America.
Right.
And so, I might be an American, but at the end of the day, I want America to act in such a way that America is a blessing to the whole world. And maybe one day that will even mean that there are no countries anymore, and if that's the case, that's fine, because ultimately I am a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. And so as a proud American, what I want to be proud of is that one day, maybe in the future, when the world looks back, a world, maybe a united world that's in some sense utopian or whatever, and they look back at history and they say, yeah, back when there used to be nations, yeah, that's a bad idea, but the one nation that stood out was the United States of America. To me, that's what would make me proud to be an American, is that the country I'm a part of is bringing about a world that's a blessing to everyone. Yeah. And that's what the Old Testament that's how Israel saw themselves, is that Israel would be the nation that would bring the kingdom of heaven to earth, and all nations in the world would be blessed. And these are the kind of things that we need to think about and ponder, and I think take seriously.
Yeah.
So to me, as a Christian, it's like, okay, yeah, this is the stuff you take seriously here, and for good reason. And to me, there's no reason. I mean, we can look at the pantheon of Greek literature, let's say, and we can say, yeah, Aristotle's idea that everything was made out of four elements, earth, air, water, and fire. It was a good idea for way back then, but it's wrong. Completely wrong. He's completely wrong, okay? But Plato's cave, man, how brilliant, how many insights that brings to life for us and guides us in so many situations, and is still valuable yet today. We need to hold on to Plato's cave. We give honor to Aristotle's earth, wind, and fire, because it ultimately led us to understand the elements, that things were made of atoms, and that was a good place to start even, and we can still even honor that for what it was, okay? But we don't live by it, obviously.
Right.
And I think we could view the Bible that way, and there's no good reason we can't say, okay, look, we understand why they thought what they were wrong, but it was a place to start, and it got us to this place. But look, these ideas of, that one day, the kingdom of heaven will be on earth, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed, and there'll be a sense in which the world is one. And
that's something to hold on to.
And the lion will lay down with the lamb. I mean, man, how do you bring that world about?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's something we should be taking seriously, and that means taking seriously things like, I do think that your faith should be informing your politics, your economics, your life decisions. It's not just your personal decisions, how should I be thinking in terms of government and economics, and how should I be voting? Because this is the world I want to bring about, and I want to be part of an entity that says, hey, we're all going to do this. We're going to try and bring this world about. So yes, we are going to do things. And then what does that look like? But to do that, you're going to have to be a person who truth is the most important thing. And, being a citizen of the kingdom of heaven trumps being, a citizen of the United States, much less a Republican or a Democrat.
Right.
And for you, then it's just, whether I'm going to vote Republican or Democrat is going to be whichever party is most in line with these values that my faith and my community holds, because we're trying to bring about a bigger world. And so, if you were at one point doing that well and now you're not, well, okay, then I'm going to leave your party because I don't care about a party. I care about bringing about the world that God wants me to bring about.
Yeah. I was going to close by asking, I ask everybody this question, but you kind of gave the answer, I think. And the question is, if you find somebody in your life that they've deconstructed, right? They've taken these bricks out of the wall, like Larry likes to use that analogy, right? And they're sitting in ash, they're feeling dirty, they're feeling lost, they're feeling lost.
Yeah.
I think what you said about truth is of paramount importance. So we're gonna strive to be people of truth.
Right.
Wouldn't that be the advice
you
would give?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be for me too.
And it is tricky because as I have researched it and pondered it, I mean, it does seem like that there are times when the whole truth at once maybe is not a good idea. Sometimes for a person, they have to be eased into something, and even things like, Dan Kahneman, he points out, he says, look, there's so much randomness and things like starting a business and everything, and Nassim Taleb points this out, and people start these businesses like with these big dreams and everything, and the truth is they don't have much control over their own success in those kinds of ventures. No matter how hard they try, no matter how talented they are, randomness is just a huge factor, and that the odds are stacked against them. But the thing is if nobody ever does that.
Nobody ever dreams the big dreams.
Then there's never Googles. There's never,
Exactly.
Microsofts. There's never the things where people do things that really do change the world. If nobody tries because the odds are so stacked against them that it's irrational to try, then we never get it.
And that's what I meant several weeks ago when we were talking about rationality becomes a problem. That's a good example of what I was getting at.
Right.
Not that rationality is a problem; it's the way to think. But when it cuts you off from dreaming, if nobody ever dreamed, so
that's right.
It actually becomes irrational not to dream.
So it's what I've told people about that is look. The question is well, if everyone knows the truth, if they really embrace the idea that, look, there's a 95% chance that this endeavor is going to fail.
Right.
How should they as individuals, and how should our society respond to that? Because the thing is we need those people to try.
Yeah.
Okay. And so number one is like, well, look, your effort in doing this thing has to be grounded in more than just its success. Okay, there's got to be some value in the effort. Yeah. There's got to be something that gives you a sense of meaning and purpose in the effort. And so, it's like the story of, the beach at Normandy is where, it was just, the United States knew that to take the beach, because the Germans were so entrenched, we just had to overwhelm them. But in overwhelming them, we were just going, it was like, I forget, it was like 80% of the first wave of soldiers were going to die, and they knew that. But the only way to do it was to do it that way. And so you're getting off the boat, and when that lever drops for you to go, there's a chance that within the first 5 seconds you're going to be dead because they're just aiming right at with their Gatling guns. And but the thing is that you being there and dying is still what brings about the ultimate success. And so there's a sense in which I think you have to say, okay, you know what? Yeah, 95% chance I'm going to fail, but I'm still going to dream it. I'm still going to try, and I'm going to go against the odds and hope that I'm one of them that makes it. And then the other thing is if we recognize at a societal level that we need this to happen, maybe we should think about safety nets that say, hey, if you try this, it doesn't mean that, you won't lose everything. You won't lose health care for you and your children and beyond, It's like, hey, we want to make it so that you can try this. And if you do fail, it's not the end of the world,
Because no matter how much things are stacked against people, the more that we level the playing field in terms of opportunity.
Right.
The better.
That's right.
Equal opportunity.
Right.
But anyway,
yeah,
we've gone a long time.
Yeah.
My watch is saying, you need to get up and move. But as always.
If you keep doing this, you're just going to be fat and old.
Yeah. I'm there.
There's your AI.
But anyway, this was good, of course. And I love talking with you about this stuff. And maybe we should do a series of talks on what that new faith looks like that the average person can take a hold of and run with. So.
Well, if we call it a faith for the 21st century, as we do it and we do the study, I'll be gathering stuff for my book, which will have the same title. And
All right. So thanks.
All right. Yeah, man. It's great being here.